I organized a fake wedding and now my ex-wife is threatening to expose me. I organized a fake wedding and married my wife. And now my actual wife is threatening to expose me. 7 years ago, I met my now wife while completing my master's degree. She was a foreign student and we were in the same flat for student accommodation and we hit it off immediately. It wasn't long before we started dating. And then fast forwarded a year or two and she decided to stay in the country and we moved in together. I love this woman and things were going great, but she eventually started to bring up the topic of marriage. My family is very traditional and she insisted that if we were going to continue being together, then we have to get married. I was strongly against this, but I seriously cannot say no to this woman and I eventually agreed. Now here's the kicker. I'm technically still married to my ex-wife. We did not end things on good terms, so I left without getting a divorce, changed my number and contact info. I did not want to have any contact with my ex-wife. And since my wife is foreign, she doesn't know the proper legal processes required to get married here. I told her that I would deal with the legal aspect while she organized the wedding. She did have some question as to why she never had to sign anything or provide any form of ID, but I lied and said that it wasn't needed for where we live. We had a large wedding and it would have been absolutely magical if it weren't for the fact that the whole time I was sweating bullets, wondering if anyone would find out it was all a ruse. The only people who had any idea it wasn't a proper wedding were the staff, where I said that we were already legally married and were having a reception now that we had the money. We've been married for almost 3 years now and she still has absolutely no idea, and it seemed like I had gotten away with the impossible. That was until last week when my actual wife reached out to me. Apparently, she found out through a mutual friend that I had remarried and got my contact info from them. She called me all sorts of names and said that she would make sure that my wife finds out about my lies. I begged her not to and offered to get an actual divorce, but she told me that it was too late for that. I've been stressed out of my mind these past few days and honestly don't know what to do. Telling my wife is absolutely off the table, as I know for a fact that she would leave me without hesitation.
Am I the asshole for messaging my DoorDash driver about this? I, female 26, ordered some food from DoorDash this evening. When the food arrived, I grabbed the bag off of the front porch and noticed that the safety seal was ripped. I struggle with food contamination OCD and have come a long way in therapy to be able to order off apps like this. My initial reaction was to throw the food away, but it was expensive to have it delivered, and it was for my son and I. So I decided to message the driver and ask if there was a reason it was ripped open. I was thinking maybe the workers forgot to add something and they did that last minute to add sauce or something. But the dasher snapped back at me, telling me that's just how he grabbed the bag and to just eat the food. When I explained why I first messaged him, he went off on me again. He even tried to say that's not how he dropped it off, but noticed the seal was ripped on the side of the bag that it was folded on, not the side pictured in the drop-off picture. I don't know. Now I just feel like a Karen and stupid for even messaging about it. What do you guys think? Do you just ignore the broken seal if you get one? Or maybe have insight for why seals might be broken when you get it? So Dasher sends OP a message. It's a sticker, ma'am. Chick-fil-A is not perfect. Those are teenagers over there trying to keep up with the demand of all these orders that are coming through drive-thru, front counter, Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash. These children are doing the best they can, so every sticker is not going to be perfect. Some stickers are ripped on bags, it happens. But at the end of the day, no one has been inside of your bag on my end. But I've already reached out to DoorDash and let them know the situation because I know I did not deliver that in bad condition. And that bag does not look the way that it is between you and the DoorDash, whether or not you get a refund or they prevent you from using their app, because that is not the way the bag looked when I dropped it off.
My boyfriend cheated on me with his best friend's fiance, and I want revenge on all 3 of them. I'm gonna be absolutely real with y'all. When I met my boyfriend for the first time, I absolutely despised him. I thought he was the most annoying, most obnoxious, most self-centered man I'd ever met, and that he only had like 2 brain cells in his head. We were in a class together in college, and he was aggressively failing it. So one day my professor pulled me aside and asked if I could tutor him, and I was like, no, actually not a chance. But then she said she would give me extra credit, and I was like, you know what? It can't be that bad. And as I began tutoring him, I realized he was actually really smart. He just did not apply himself at all. He was just a little party frat boy that was prioritizing going out and getting girls rather than applying himself in school. He opened up to me that he was actually really unhappy with the life he was living, but he felt like he had to act that way in order to get other people to like him. And I was like, not this man being vulnerable with me. That's wild. We started spending more and more time together, apart from just studying. And yeah, okay, what can I say? He won me over. He's a charming guy. My boyfriend and I have been together 8 years now, and it is absolutely insane to think that he is the same person that I met in my freshman year science class. Like, my boyfriend is not like that guy at all. He's given up everything from his party boy lifestyle, except for his best childhood friend, Max. Now, Max openly and aggressively hates me. He blames me for being the reason that him and my boyfriend don't see each other every day, and now they only see each other about once a week. He also blames me for the fact that my boyfriend is less fun than he used to be. Every time I've hung out with Max, he has said to my boyfriend in front of me things like, well, when you come to your senses and dump Kelsey, XYZ, like, in front of me, okay? Please say it behind my back. I told my boyfriend, look, I'm never going to tell you who you can and can't hang out with, but I'm not a fan of Max. I don't like the way he speaks to me and about me, and he is not somebody that I want to be around. And my boyfriend completely respected that, and he does not bring Max around me, and he never expects me to go anywhere where Max is going to be. Okay, so let's bring it on back to the present day. Max and his long-term girlfriend just got engaged. Now, not a huge fan of this girl. Not as much as I'm not a huge fan of Max, but you know, you can just tell people are fake. Like, she always tries to be so fake nice to me. She's not very good at it. She gives me the most backhanded compliments, like, wow, like, I could never pull off what you're wearing. Like, girl, I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say you think it's ugly. Well, 2 nights ago, Max and his fiance invited me and my boyfriend over to celebrate their engagement with them. And it was just going to be the 4 of us. My boyfriend asked if I wanted to go, and I was like, I literally cannot think of anything I would rather do less than that. That sounds like a terrible, terrible, terrible time. So my boyfriend went without me. I kissed him goodbye, and I thought everything was going to be fine. Everything was not fine. My boyfriend didn't come home that night, and he didn't text me, which made me a little nervous, but I know him, and a lot of the times when he hangs out with Max, he ends up just spending the night there, so I didn't think too much of it. Checked his location. He was at Max's house. I felt fine. I felt okay about it. I was like, he probably just fell asleep, and I went to bed. The next morning, my boyfriend comes home, and he is a mess. He looks horrible, and he's in tears. Like, he's just, like, eyes are bloodshot red. I can tell he's been crying, and he's still, like, blubbering away. I keep asking him what's wrong, but he's unable to tell me. Like, he's just so upset. He's clearly still out of it. So I help him get in the shower and tell him, okay, let's go to sleep. In a few hours when you wake up, we can talk then. When he woke up, he told me the story that broke my heart like I never thought it could be broken. He told me that as soon as he got there, Max started pressuring him to drink. Now, my boyfriend does not drink like he used to, and he doesn't drink like Max drinks now. But Max is the most peer pressure man I've ever met. So he kept pushing my boyfriend and pushing him and just making fun of him, calling him lame, saying that he's not as fun as he used to be, and my boyfriend gave in. He said after that, Max started going into this giant rant about how he is the luckiest man in the world and how he feels so sorry for any man that hasn't had the chance to make out with his fiance because his fiance is the most beautiful woman that's ever existed, blah, blah, blah. He said the last thing he remembers is that Max was just pushing my boyfriend to make out with his fiance, saying, bro, you have to do it. Like, come on, it'd be so fun. It'd be so funny. Like, come on. And my boyfriend gave in to that too. When he woke up in the morning, he was laying next to Max's fiance. What a cast of characters we have. We have my cheating boyfriend, his evil best friend, and the home-wrecking fiance. He was begging me to forgive him, telling me how sorry he was, that I'm the love of his life, that he can't lose me, and honestly, I believe him. I think he does love me, but that doesn't matter. I told him to get out of the house. I was like, go live with your throuple, okay? I don't want to see you. He's shown me proof that he's completely blocked Max, Max's whole family, his fiance. It said he will literally never have contact with them again, and just begging me to forgive him, saying we can go to couples therapy, and just really wants to work on making things right, but I don't know. I don't know if I can ever forgive him for this. The wildest part is my boyfriend showed me a text from Max where Max admitted that this whole thing was planned between Max and his fiance to get rid of me. Max didn't want me around anymore, and he thought that if he could convince my boyfriend to cheat on me, I would break up with him, which, like, yeah, I guess that is a good plan. That would work, except for the fact that now my boyfriend feels betrayed. And there is just absolutely no way that I'm letting Max and his fiance get away with that.
It's fascinating to me. It really is so intriguing. Imagine him cradling the tape recorder, leaning back in his chair, looking at you in the eye, saying, I'm not crazy, I'm not a monster, I don't have split personality, I'm just a normal individual. Imagine saying that, knowing the crimes that you have committed. That is the scariest part to me. I can't comprehend how eyes that have seen the most unspeakable thing, the most gruesome crimes, those same eyes can look at you in the eye and say, I didn't do anything, I'm just a normal guy. That is terrifying. Ted Bundy, I tried to ignore his name, but I just can't any longer. I've been gone, I've been on vacation, but now I'm back and I thought, what better way to make it up to you guys than do a longer video about Ted Bundy. So here we are, it's gonna be long and it's going to be disturbing. Fair warning. Ted Bundy was born in Vermont to his mom, Eleanor Louise. His mother was still living at home when she gave birth. Who the father is unclear. For the first few years of his life, Ted was raised to believe that his grandparents were his parents and that his actual mother was his older sister. However, he would discover the truth eventually, and when his mother decided it was time for them to move out, she took Ted and they moved to Seattle. It was in Seattle where Ted's mom met Johnny Bundy. She married him, and that is where the Bundy last name comes from. Johnny and Eleanor had more kids together, and Johnny ended up adopting Ted. Ted held a lot of resentment towards his mother for his confusing childhood, for allowing him to believe that his grandparents were his parents, and then for never telling him who his father was. When he was 14 years old, Ted found his birth certificate, and the father was listed as unknown, and it made him so angry, and he associated that anger towards his mother. He was also not the biggest fan of his stepdad. He would complain a lot about the fact that he was not his real father, and he disliked him even more because he wasn't very bright. His entire life, Ted held people who were wealthy and smart to a higher standard. Basically, if you were not rich and you were not smart, Ted would look down on you, and that included his stepdad. As a child, he was described as a little bit of an outcast, but he always did very good in school. He later spoke about how during his childhood, he chose to be alone because he didn't understand how to make friends. He didn't know how to build relationships, but he never saw anything wrong with it. Referring to himself, Ted later said, quote, some people perceived me as being shy and introverted. I didn't go to dances, I didn't go to social outings. I was pretty, you might call me straight, but not a social outcast in any way. He was a social outcast. After graduating high school, Ted decided that he wanted to go to law school. He wanted to become a lawyer and also get a degree in psychology. During law school, he met Diane Edwards. Ted would later describe Diane as the only woman that he ever really loved. Diane came from a very wealthy family. She was very smart, two of the most valuable things in Ted's mind, and he quickly became obsessed with her, but he was not only obsessed, he was also jealous. He was jealous of his girlfriend because she had everything that he had ever wanted. She was smart, she was beautiful, she was rich, she had a nice car, she had a nice home, she was loved, and she was well respected by all of her peers, and Ted saw all of that. And it was everything that he had ever wanted for himself, so he quickly fell in love with her, but it sounds like it was for the wrong reasons. His relationship with Diane ended after a few years, and in 1974, shortly after the breakup, Ted would break into the house of 18-year-old Karen Sparks. Karen looked a lot like Diane, Ted's first girlfriend. They both had thick, long brown hair that was parted down the middle. The similarities between Diane and many of his victims were very noticeable. Ted broke into Karen's house while she was still sleeping. He snuck into her bedroom, grabbed a metal rod from her bed frame, and hit her in the head with it until she was unconscious. He then essayed her using that same metal rod. He used so much force that it caused extensive internal injuries. It even ruptured her bladder. He continued to harm her and hit her with the metal rod until he was satisfied, I guess, and then he left. Thankfully, Karen would survive the attack, but she was in the hospital for a very, very long time and was left with permanent brain damage because of what Ted did to her. That was the first victim that we know of, the first victim that Ted confessed to, but we will really never know if he had victims prior. The very next month, Ted broke into the house of 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy. He beat her until she was unconscious. He dressed her with new clothing, put her in his car, drove to a secluded area where he would essay her, murder her, and dispose of her body. By July of 1974, Ted Bundy had ended the lives of 8 women, and he used or had 2 main strategies to pick out his victims. It seems like he always did it one of 2 ways. He would either break into their houses while they were sleeping, or he would pretend to be injured, putting on a fake cast on his arm or finding crutches and using those to pretend that he was hurt. And he would go out in public and make girls believe that he needed help. When they offered to help him, he would lure them to his car, pull out a crowbar, and hit them hard enough to knock them out, and then he would shove them inside of his car. It was around this time as well when Ted met Elizabeth Clover. We're gonna call her Liz. Liz was a single mother. She worked as a secretary at the UW School of Medicine. Liz and Ted would fall in love, and they would be together for the next 5 years. Ted was incredible to Liz. He worshipped the ground ground that she walked on, and she loved him for it. She quickly fell in love with his charming personality. She thought he was the perfect guy, not only for her, but her family loved him as well. He also quickly became a father figure for her little 3-year-old daughter, and that just made Liz love him even more. And their little life at home was wonderful. It was perfect. It was the kind of life that so many people dream of having one day. But after dark, when Liz and her daughter would go to bed, Ted would go out on the town and he would live a completely different life. A violent, gruesome life of crime. Now let's talk about what life looked like from an outsider perspective as someone living in Seattle. The community was terrified, and young women, right? Women's plural, woman singular. Young women were living in fear as more and more girls kept going missing. Girls would go missing, their family and friends would report them missing, and bodies of girls would just be found in such horrible conditions, showing what they suffered and what they went through before they lost their lives. It was the biggest mystery in town. No one could figure out who was responsible for doing this, and as soon as they thought maybe they were on the right track, they would get interrupted because a new victim would be found. In regards to more than one victim, witnesses would come forward and they would tell police that they would see these women prior to them going missing, talking to a man near his vehicle that was a tan-colored Volkswagen. And some witnesses said they overheard the man introducing himself as Ted, which is how police get a name, and they draw up a sketch, they put it out to the public and let them know that they're looking for someone that looks like this sketch and is named Ted. Reminder, Ted and Liz are still together at this point, so when the sketch came out, Liz's coworkers put it in front of her and said, hey, this kind of looks like your Ted, maybe you should be careful, maybe it might be him. But Liz shut down those rumors immediately. In her eyes, there was absolutely no possible way that her boyfriend, her best friend, the father figure to her daughter, could do anything like that. The thought wasn't even there. It wasn't an option. At this time, it was non-existent in Liz's mind. There was not a world in which her Ted Bundy could commit these crimes. And although Liz didn't think that her Ted was the Ted that authorities were looking for, she did start paying closer attention to his behavior. And she noticed that slowly but surely, Ted was getting a little bit more aggressive, especially when they would be intimate together. Ted loved to have control in the bedroom, and one time he even asked Liz to just lay there and pretend that she was dead. Pretty wild and concerning behavior now that we know what he did. By August of 1974, so many girls were going missing, too many girls. Ted decided that it was time for him to move away to avoid getting on police's radar. He applied and got accepted to another law school in Utah. He would move out to attend law school in Utah, leaving Liz and her daughter behind. They would stay in Seattle and he would go to Utah to go study. Within the very first day of Ted living in this new place in Utah, a woman goes missing. By November, 4 more women disappear. Ted continued his act, his routine of going to public places like public beaches. He would pretend that he was injured. He would introduce himself as Ted, ask for help until the women got close to his car, which is when he would knock them out, shove them inside of his car, and he would take out the front seat, the passenger seat of his vehicle, store that in the trunk to make space for his victims so they could lie there unconscious and handcuffed without anyone seeing them while he drove around. He would drive them to a secluded wooded area, beat them until they were no longer alive. He would then SA them and leave their bodies. I didn't know this detail. This was new for me when I was researching this case, but at times Ted would his victims and he would take the heads, only the heads, back to his apartment with him, and he would put makeup on them and he would hang out with the heads and talk to them as if it was a real person. He would kiss the heads and use them for his own pleasure. We know that he did this to at least 12 of his victims. Again, throughout this whole time, Ted is still living his double life. He has his happy little family back at home and he keeps presenting himself as a charming, good guy. From an outsider's perspective, he was seen as a handsome, friendly guy that had absolutely everything going for him. He was attending law school, he was studying psychology, he was involved in politics, and he did give off the impression that he was a very well put together, intelligent man. There were times actually that police did talk to him about the crimes because they had received tips of this Volkswagen that matched Ted's car. The few descriptions and tips they have received also matched Ted's appearance. Police would talk to him, but all they would see was this clean, smart, soon-to-be lawyer man, so when Ted would say that he had absolutely nothing to do with it, they would just believe him. Back at home, Liz's friends and family are telling her, look, I know that you don't want to think that your Ted might be responsible for this, but as soon as Ted left, girls stopped going missing here. Now they are going missing there, in the state that Ted moved to at the time that Ted moved. That's when Liz started thinking this is really weird because it seems like anywhere that Ted goes, the crimes follow. One day, Liz's daughter was getting ready to be baptized and Ted went over there the night before to help them prep for the next morning. The night that he showed up, he left early, and that same night, a girl went missing, and coincidentally, Ted showed up late to the baptism the next morning. I think that was the first time that Liz really started started wondering if her Ted Bundy, if the love of her life, really could be capable of everything that she was seeing on TV and in the newspapers. Liz got so suspicious that she actually ended up calling investigators saying, I think the person that you're looking for might be my boyfriend. But at the time, the police were getting so many calls like that of girls saying that they think their boyfriend might be the person doing all these crimes, which if you think your boyfriend might be capable of doing anything like that, break up with him, I beg you. Anyway, so the police find Ted. They talk to him and they ask him about the unsolved missing people's cases. And Ted said, no, it wasn't me. That sucks and it's unfortunate, but I can't help you because I don't have any information because I didn't do it. And I guess the cop said, okay, well, I guess it's not him. In January of 1975, a girl named Karen Aline Campbell goes missing in Colorado. Her body was found a month later, frozen on the side of the road, no longer alive. She is believed to be Ted Bundy's 14th documented victim. In March of that same year, 26-year-old ski instructor Julie Lyle disappears as well. Not long after that, Ted approached another young lady outside of a store parking lot. He told her that he was an investigator and that someone was caught breaking into her car and that she needed to come with him immediately. The girl freaked out. Obviously, I would be freaked out as well if someone told me someone was breaking into my car. So she followed Ted. They started walking towards the car, but the girl is looking at the car and she says, my car looks fine. It doesn't look like my car was broken into. Are you sure that you have the right car? And Ted assures her that it was her car and that she actually needs to come down to the station to talk about the car breaking and to report it. The girl asked for an ID because she was a bit suspicious, and Ted did pull out a badge. I mean, obviously a fake badge. She gets in the car and they start driving, but she gets more and more suspicious when she realizes the way they're driving is not the way the police station is located at, and she attempts to jump out of the car. There is a struggle. Ted tries to handcuff her and he tries to attack her, but she's eventually able to get out of the car and she gets into a car that was driving by. She's screaming for help and Ted immediately speeds off. This is an issue now because that girl saw Ted Bundy's face. She saw the car. She was almost one of his victims and she was able to report it to the police and again give a description of the attacker. On August 16th of 1975, Ted Bundy gets pulled over because he drove the kind of car that police were looking for. And get this, he was driving around sorority houses when it was dark outside with his headlights turned off, looking very suspicious. The cop makes Ted get out of the car so he could search his vehicle, and what they found was telling. The officer found ski masks, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, and rope, amongst other things. Asks Ted about it, and Ted says, oh, well, first of all, the ski masks are for skiing. The handcuffs he said he found in a dumpster, and the rest of the stuff he said were just common household items. But the cop is not buying it. Ted gets arrested, and now they have this girl that was almost abducted, and they have this guy that matches the description that she gave. So they put Ted in a lineup with other men and they asked the girl to identify the attacker, and she points Ted out immediately. She had no doubt in her mind that that was the guy that tried to take her, and Ted Bundy gets charged with kidnapping. However, they also had the same lineup for other victims, and 7 out of the 8 victims were not able to identify Ted. They saw him and they said that it wasn't him. Ted's family and friends hear that Ted has been arrested and they think this is so messed up, they have the wrong guy. Our Ted is wonderful. He would never do something like this. They pay his bail and Ted leaves jail. He immediately drives to go see his girlfriend Liz, and he shows up at her front porch and it catches her so off guard because she thought that he was supposed to be in jail. But Ted uses his tactical manipulative skills to make Liz think that they did have the wrong guy. He begs her to let him come home and Liz agrees, and their relationship continues. In March of 1976, Ted is convicted for that kidnapping charge. He is sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison, and during this time he is still maintaining his innocence. I'm repeating myself here, but Ted's family was in denial that Ted could be responsible for any of this. However, when investigators started looking at past girlfriends, that's when the true red flags really started to present themselves. Because past girlfriends would say, yeah, I mean, he was great, he was charming, but he had a complete different side to him, a dark side, a side that would cause him to get angry very often, and he would get so mad that his eyes would go dark. They would go dark and he would look evil. Okay, so by this time, investigators have started to connect some dots, and they think that Ted Bundy might also be responsible for the murder of another young woman, and they find enough evidence to charge him for that as well while he is already in prison. This is also when different police stations from different states finally start to communicate with each other, and they were comparing crimes and victim types, and it seemed like almost every victim was between the ages of 15 and 25 years old, and most were female college students. They also all had a very similar look to them. A headline comes out in a newspaper and the title says, "Is Utah Ted Seattle Ted?" And then Utah starts talking to Washington, who starts talking to Colorado, who talks to Oregon, who talks to Idaho, and things start to get juicy, for a lack of a better word. In prison, Ted kept up his persona of being this charming, charismatic, friendly, kind, outgoing man that was wrongfully convicted, and everyone in there loved him. Everyone in prison thought that he was great. They trusted him. He would get along with everyone and he would make everyone laugh. I mean, his manipulative tactics are really unlike anything that I've seen before. June 7th of 1977, Ted Bundy is transported from a prison to a courthouse for a preliminary hearing. During a recess, Ted asked if he could go to the courthouse library. He wanted to research his case and they allowed him to go in the library. They took all the handcuffs and everything off of him because he's so charming and wonderful and he's not gonna run away. So he goes into the library and a guard is standing in the doorway to monitor him, and Ted sees a window. He sees the windows open and he described the day to be a beautiful morning. He saw the sky, thought it was nice and blue, and when the guard turned around, he jumped out of the window from the second floor. I think it was like 25 feet. He jumped out of the window. He did hurt his ankle, but he just got up and made a run for it. When the guard realized that Ted was missing, people started asking each other where Ted was, and nobody knew, and it was complete and utter chaos. Investigators have described that day and that moment to have been a surreal experience. He is on the run for 6 days, playing a game of catch me if you can with the cops, but eventually he is found and he is sent back to prison. But that would not be the only time that Ted Bundy would escape prison. Throughout November and December, Ted plans to escape again. He starts losing a lot of weight, and above his cell on the ceiling, there was what I assumed to be an air vent. Ted's goal was to get small enough, skinny enough to crawl into the vent and into the ceiling. And he did. He lost 35 pounds, and at night he would crawl up there and start digging out his path to escape little by little. There was one point where inmates reported this to the staff from the prison, saying that at night they would hear Ted Bundy in the ceiling, which is literally so scary to me. I don't know why. Something about like people crawling around, being secretive and like trying to be quiet and just crawling. Ugh, it gives me the shivers. Inmates told staff that and they didn't do anything about it. On December 30th, when a lot of the prison staff was away for the holidays, Ted gathered a lot of books and a lot of stuff and placed them on his bed, covered it up with a blanket to make it seem like he was lying in bed. But instead, he crawled up the air vents and through his little path, and he broke in through the ceiling into somebody's office. He changed into street clothing from the closet that was in that office, and he walked out the front door as if he were a free man. He got a flight to Chicago, got a train to Michigan, stole a car to drive to Atlanta, hopped on a bus, and ended up in Tallahassee, Florida. He finds a room to rent right by a university right next to all of these sorority houses. Only 1 week after arriving in Tallahassee at 2:45 in the morning, Ted Bundy broke into a sorority house. He snuck into the room of 21-year-old Margaret Elizabeth Bowman, and he brutally ended her life using a piece of firewood. He then walked into the room of 20-year-old Lisa Jeanette Levy. He ended her life, SA'd her, and did many horrible things to her, leaving her with a bite mark. After that, Ted walked over to the room of 21-year-old Kathy Klenner, attacking her and leaving her with a broken jaw. After that, he goes into another room of 21-year-old Karen Chandler, and he left her with a concussion, a broken jaw, a crushed finger, and missing teeth. The first 2 girls sadly lost their lives, but the last 2 girls did survive the attacks. Ted Bundy's last victim was 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach. She was in school in class when a teacher asked her to go to the parking lot and grab her purse from her car, but Kimberly was never seen again. Ted saw her in the parking lot, lured her into his car, and did unspeakable things to her, ending her life. Her remains would be found 7 weeks later with proof that she suffered an immense amount of pain before she passed away. In February, Ted Bundy was arrested by a Pensacola officer for driving a stolen vehicle. In the car, they found 3 sets of IDs belonging to university female students and 21 stolen credit cards. He was later charged with the homicides of the female sorority girls. Now, something massive about Ted Bundy is his arrogance. He had such a big ego and a massive desire to be in control. He thought he was intelligent enough and more than capable to manipulate the legal system and convince the court of his innocence. Not only did Ted have little trust in the legal system, but he had been keeping track of his cases and everything that people were saying about him because he absolutely loved to be the center of attention. And because of that, he made the decision to represent himself in court. I assume that it's because he thought if he did, he would be able to narrate the story and shape it to say the story the way that he wanted it to be told. He would be able to craft his own dramatic court performance, but the issue with that is that he really overestimated his legal knowledge and skills. However, something else that did feed his ego, it fed it a lot, was how much people loved him. Ted Bundy had fans, I don't know what else you would call them, especially female fans, which is crazy, that would romanticize Ted and his charismatic personality. I think there was a certain psychological fascination with him because I guess when you think of a serial killer, you have a picture of of your mind, or at least I do, of a very creepy looking man that looks off and maybe a little weird, like a little bit suspicious, but Ted looked nothing like that. He was a law student, a soon-to-be lawyer. He was clean. People described him as handsome. More than anything, I believe it was the way that he spoke, the way that he presented himself with such confidence, that he would chuckle here and there, making people laugh, making people smile, and the public was eating it up, and Ted loved it. What ultimately determined his fate was the bite mark that he left on that one victim. I mean, you can't really deny that. If your dental records are matching, you can't say otherwise. Eventually, Ted Bundy was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. He was on death row for 10 years, and now we get to the infamous Ted Bundy tapes. During his initial interviews and prior to his confessions, Ted was just talking and talking nonsense, and investigators were not getting anywhere with him. It wasn't until one of the reporters that was interviewing Ted came up with the idea to suggest that they talk to Ted about the crimes in a third-person point of view. They wanted to ask Ted to talk about the crimes in third person instead of speaking about them as if he did them, because it would feel more like storytelling than a confession. And when they brought up that to Ted and Ted started talking that way, that was the key. He grabbed the tape recorder, held it close to him, leaned back in his chair, and spilled. His goal with these tapes was clear. He wanted to have control over his narrative even after he was already behind bars. If he said it in that way, he would only give as many details and only give as many confessions as he wanted to. He would say the story the way that he wanted it to be heard. We now know that Ted Bundy was responsible for taking the lives of at least 30 women, but it's believed to be many more. In his conversations, he told detectives that there were homicides that he would not talk about because they were either too close to home or they had children involved. Which is crazy, isn't it? Because he committed the crimes. He was the person doing all these horrible things to the people, but he couldn't talk about them because they were too horrible, but he had no problem doing them. It's whack. The recordings were more than just confessions. They were Ted's final attempt to dominate the narrative of his life and crimes, even on his last days. Ted Bundy was executed on a Tuesday of January 24th, 1989. His last words were to his attorney and his minister. He said, quote, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends," end quote.